Hello friends, welcome back to the Spring Mischief Quilt Along series. In part one, we covered fabric requirements and cutting instructions. So if you haven't seen that yet, I'll link it below. And today in part two, we're going to start sewing our blocks together. So if you're sewing along with the pattern, you will have cut 20 fat quarters into 9.5 by 3.5 inch rectangle units. And that is enough units to make 64 blocks or a 72-inch square quilt. And if you want to make your quilt bigger or smaller than that, you can easily do that just by making more or less blocks. And the way these blocks go together is by sewing 3 units in a row like this. Every block is the same. It's just straight sewing. There's no seams to nest, so it's great for just mindless straight lines, chain piecing. You don't have to think too much about it. It's very simple and great practice if you're a beginner. Now, if you want to control where your prints end up in this quilt, you can lay all your blocks out to begin with before you sew them together. But part of the joy of this quilt for me is just sewing them together at random and letting them fall where they fall. I'm usually pretty intense about matching colors and fabric placement and secondary patterns and light and shade and all these things. But for me, this quilt just gives me permission to just sew. So if that's what you also feel like doing, then you can do that. But if you want your pieces to be more planned out and in specific places, then you can just lay all your blocks out before you start sewing. But for me, because we're making 64 blocks, I've gone ahead and just sort of randomly gathered 64 of my pieces, and then all the rest of my pieces I've just put into a pile next to my sewing machine, and we'll see that in a minute. I kind of just stick them in a basket, mix them all up, and then each one of these 64 pieces will have another piece sewn to it, and then those pairs will have a third piece sewn to it. And really the only thing I try to stick to is not to sew 2 exact same pieces of fabric together. And that's about it. Otherwise, I just let them come to the machine as I grab them and sew them together. Okay, so let's go sit down at the machine and we'll start sewing. Okay, so we're here at my machine, and as you can see, I just have my stack of 64 units here lined up ready to go. And you probably can't see in the shot. I'll try and show you. I literally have just messed up all of the other pieces and put them in this basket. Just in any random order, and I'll just select from there and sew them together. Now, incidentally, if you are local to me in Perth, Western Australia, and watching this at the time of filming, which is October 2025, I'm teaching a workshop in a couple of weeks for how to make these fabric nesting bowls. You make a set of 4, everything's included in the workshop, and you can find details about that on my website, linked below. Okay. So before we get started sewing, I'll just talk to you a bit about my setup here. On my machine, I have a piece of 1/4-inch seam tape, which is by a company called Cluck Cluck Sew, and it looks like this. It's basically like a printed washi tape, and the red line indicates where the needle is, and the black lines indicate a 1/4 inch away from it. So when I line my fabric up to sew, I know the red line is the needle, and I'll line the edge of my fabric up with this black line, and that means I'm going to get a 1/4 inch seam. Now in here also, I have little pieces of fabric. These are called leaders and enders, and when you're chain piecing, you can use those to keep your sewing moving. So when you get to the end of a row of pieces, you just pop one of these in, sew over it, and then you can trim your thread and pull off all the pieces that you've sewn together. That way you don't have to leave long tails in between all of your pieces. Saves thread, saves time, and it's fun. All right, let's get started. So I'm just going to take one piece out of my basket and one piece off of my stack. I'm going to line them up. And I'm just going to sew down one side with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. See how I'm just lined up with this black line here? Now my foot is also a scant 1/4 inch, so I could just line up with the edge of my foot but the tape also is helpful to have there. And when I get to the end, instead of breaking thread, cutting thread, and pulling that piece off, I'm just going to go ahead and take the next one, grab another piece from the basket, line them up, and carry on sewing. Make sure the edges are aligned properly there. And go again. Now I'm going to go ahead and chain piece all of my pairs together, all 64 pairs, and then when I get to the end, I'm going to take my ender and I'm just going to run that onto my needle. Then I'm going to snip the end off there and I'll pull back my chain of pairs. And then these look like this. And then after that, once I've got all 64 of my pairs sewn together, I'm going to have to sew a third piece onto each pair. So you can either clip all of your pieces apart or leave them connected in a big long line. So I'll go back to my basket, grab another piece that's not the same pattern, line that up with this side, and sew straight down. Now with the next piece still attached, you can just open that up, choose another piece, line it up at the top there, and I'll usually run a few stitches on and then come to the back of the piece and make sure all the edges are lined up. Hold on to that and then sew straight down. And when I get to the end, I'll run my ender through, snip off the chain, and now we have 3 blocks, or when we're finished, 64 blocks, all sewn together, ready to clip apart and press. Okay, so I've sewn all of my blocks together, and now I'm going to clip them apart and press them. So the way I like to do that is to set my seams first. So I just take my iron and just press it onto the seam. And then I like to roll it back like this and just press it with my fingers. Push it out gently to make sure you don't have any fabric stuck in the seam there. Don't stretch it or warp it, just gently push it over and then press it down with a hot iron. I generally don't put water in my irons for steaming. I prefer to keep them dry, but if I need some steam, I'll use a spray bottle. And then I'll flip it over, set the seam, press it open. Now because we don't have any seams nesting in this block, you can press any way you want to. Open to one side, both in one direction, both in, both out, it doesn't matter. You can press any way you like. And you can press all your seams differently too if you want to, because none of them are going to intersect each other. There we go. Do one more. Set the seam. Finger press it open. And then press again. When we're ironing our seams like this, we try not to swish. You don't want to move your iron like this or like this because you might stretch it or warp the block. So always press. Flip it over, set the seam. Finger press it open. And then press. Okay. And then when we're done pressing, we'll lay them out like so, and then we'll sew them together up there. Okay, that's how you make the blocks for the Spring Mischief quilt. I'll be back in a few days with part 3, and we'll probably sew the blocks into rows and then sew the rows into a quilt top, because that's all that's left. It's super simple. If you want to use the same fabric I'm using, it's called Sunbonnet, and I'll leave a link to my shop in the description box below. If you still need the pattern, that will also be linked below, and if you need to see part 1, I'll link that below too. If you have any questions, you let me know below and I will get back to you. And let me know if you're also going to make the Spring Mischief quilt with me. There's no deadline or timeline. This will just be up forever and you can make it whenever you feel like it. But I'd love it if you let me know if you were going to make it and send me a picture when you're finished. So that's all for today, and I'll see you soon. Okay, love you, bye.